and allow your eyes to close or keep them open with a softened gaze. Begin by taking several long, slow, deep breaths, breathing in fully and exhaling fully. Breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth. Allow your breath to find its own natural rhythm. Bring your full attention to noticing each in-breath as it enters your nostrils, travels down to your lungs, and causes your belly to expand. And notice each out-breath as your belly contracts and air moves up through the lungs, back through the nostrils or mouth. Invite your full attention to flow with your breath. Notice how the inhale is different from the exhale. You may experience the air as cool as it enters your nose and warm as you exhale. As you turn more deeply inward, begin to let go of noises around you. If you are distracted by sounds in the room, simply notice them and then bring your intention back to your breath. Simply breathe as you breathe, not striving to change everything about your breath. Don't try to control your breath in any way. Observe and accept your experience in this moment without judgment, paying attention to each inhale and exhale. If your mind wanders to thoughts, plans, or problems, simply notice your mind wandering. Watch the thought as it enters your awareness as neutrally as possible. Then practice letting go of the thought as if it were a leaf floating down a stream. In your mind, place each thought that arises on a leaf and watch it as it floats out of sight down the stream. Then bring your attention back to your breath. Your breath is an anchor you can return to over and over again when you become distracted by thoughts. Notice when your mind has wandered. Observe the types of thoughts that hook or distract you. Noticing is the richest part of learning. With this knowledge, you can strengthen your ability to detach from thoughts and mindfully focus your awareness back on the qualities of your breath. Practice coming home to your breath with full attention, watching the gentle rise of your stomach on the in-breath and the relaxing, letting go of the out-breath. Allow yourself to be completely with your breath as it flows in and out. You might become distracted by pain or discomfort in the body or twitching or itching sensations that draw your attention away from the breath. You may also notice feelings arising, perhaps sadness or happiness, frustration or contentment. Acknowledge whatever comes up, including thoughts or stories about your experience. Simply notice where your mind went without judging it, pushing it away, clinging to it, or wishing it were different. And simply refocus your mind and guide your attention back to your breath. Breathe in and breathe out. Follow the air all the way in and all the way out. Mindfully be present moment by moment with your breath. If your mind wanders away from your breath, just notice without judging it, be it a thought, emotion, or sensation that hooks your attention, and gently guide your awareness back to your breathing. Do this now for a moment of silence. As this practice comes to an end, slowly allow your attention to expand and notice your entire body, and then beyond your body to the room you are in. When you are ready, open your eyes and come back fully alert and awake. The breath is always with you as a refocusing tool to bring you back to the present moment. Set your intention to use this practice throughout your day to help cultivate and strengthen attention. Thank you.
Thank you, musicians. Thank you for that beautiful song. Good morning. And thank you, Jonathan, for that little-known fact about being an It's a thrill just to be mentioned in the same sentence with Ray Bradbury and Isaac Asimov. I just love that. He's got one of my favorite quotes, Isaac Asimov. He said, "The great phrase in science, the one that heralds new discoveries, is not eureka, it's, that's funny." I love that. I just love that. All right, I'm going to jump right in. When I was in college, I learned a critical lesson about human nature, and a lesson that has everything to do with the work that I do now in the world. And that is that in the middle of the semester, in this psychology class, the students in that class pulled a prank on the professor. And it was based on what he was teaching us at that point, which was called classical conditioning. All right? So most people know about this idea of classical conditioning from the experiment using the famous Pavlov's dogs. Ring a bell? Okay. Seeing if you're awake. They were taught to salivate at the sound of a ringing bell. And I read recently that Pavlov's dogs is also the name of a perfume, which I think has very interesting implications for the men folk. So this is what we did in this prank. It was based on our professor's habit of pacing back and forth in front of the lecture hall when he delivered his lectures. So what happened is that whenever he paced over toward the windows, we very subtly pretended to be bored. Okay? Subtle. So we slouched and we started fidgeting and doodling and staring vacuously into outer space, which actually by mid-semester it turned out some of us were pretty accomplished at. And whenever he paced over toward the door, we now, again, almost imperceptibly, pretended to be interested. Okay, so we sat up a little straighter and took notes and, fixed him with keen scholarly expressions. By the time that day's class was over, we had our psychology professor glued to the door. Singularly, the highlight of my college years. And I half expected that when the bell rang at the end of class, he would, begin to visibly salivate or something. But what I saw in that experiment, I think I had intuited my whole life. I'd never actually seen it demonstrated, which is how incredibly easy it is to condition a human being, okay, to steer them from the outside, and by extension, of course, to be conditioned, and without a word being spoken. Not a word. The whole experiment was conducted in pantomime. And I figured if it took us barely 50 minutes to condition our psychology professor with a new set of behaviors, a new direction in life, if you will, I tried to imagine the effect on me of a lifetime's worth of that kind of conditioning by the time I was, 18. I mean the effect of thousands upon thousands of messages that every one of us got while we were growing up, and that effectively instructed us in the rules of the game. What dreams are and are not bankable. What is and isn't possible. What's the reigning definition of success in the culture? How are you supposed to behave in public? What are you personally capable of? All this. Who pulls the strings in this game and who dances? All right? And I think that the cumulative effect of a lifetime's worth of that kind of conditioning forms effectively a kind of hypnosis. In a sense, it's a kind of hypnosis. And I don't even think it matters whether the messages you got are true or false, negative or positive. It's a kind of hypnosis. And every kind of human community passes along the message, whether it's families or religion or schooling or gender or just enculturation generally. They all pass along the message that conformity is rewarded and failure to conform is punished. It's really, I think it's a holdover from natural law. Because what natural law tells us is that those who leave the herd to go their merry way have a tendency to get eaten. It's a little bit more complicated in the human arena, but I think the warning stands. The warning stands, okay? So when I think of the notion of a calling, all right, I think a calling cuts through a lot of this conditioning, because it emanates from the part of each one of us that knows what it knows. It emanates from the part of us that knows where other people leave off and where we start. And at a very early age, we know this. I've got a friend in San Francisco who told me once that she had an interaction with her 5-year-old daughter. Her name is Janaea. And I guess Janaea wanted to do something mommy didn't think advisable. And so she says, Janaea, honey, I wouldn't do that if I were you. To which Janaea replied, with absolute certainty and innocence, but mommy, you're not me. 5 years old, we know where that line is intuitively, right? Calls emanate from the part of us that knows the feel of integrity in our lives and the feel of its absence. And I don't mean integrity as a moral issue. I mean it as a psychological issue, as in being in integrity with yourself. And calls emanate from the part of us that knows what kinds of decisions it's going to take anywhere along the line to sort of make our lives literally come true. Okay? And by the way, I'm defining callings really broadly, secularly. These are the urgings, the promptings, the signs, the signals, even the imperatives that come from deep inside your life that tell you what it's going to take to stay true to true north. Okay? Oh, sorry. These are all the little urgings and promptings. Okay? And the fact is, I think, that our lives are continually asking us to stay as close as possible to our sense of integrity and authenticity and passion and fascination and service and contribution, continually asking us to do those things. And frankly, to also remember that you have a use-by date. Our lives are constantly asking us to remember that fact. You know, we have a use-by date, and we intuitively know this, that the older we get, the more the sense of urgency is turned up on these things. Doesn't that sound familiar? The more the sense of urgency is turned up, all right? And the less and less postponement of our passions and our callings becomes a viable option. You know? I saw a bumper sticker a couple years ago that said, "Warning, dates in calendar are closer than they appear." Like that. So the kind of authenticity that I'm talking about, frankly, I don't even think this is something people need to learn or discover or, go out on some great pilgrimage to find, as much as I think it's sometimes something people need to remember. Just remember. Remember, by the way, and religion both mean exactly the same thing, which is to reconnect. Religion, religare, as in ligaments, to bond, to rebond. Okay? That's what it ultimately means. So it's something that we knew once and then forgot. Often something like that. So when I was researching the Callings book, one of the things that I ran across was a college biology textbook. And there was a passage in there that just jumped out at me. It was a description of what happens in a fertilized human egg as it's growing and developing. And what the passage said is that very early on in this process, very early on, these subtle indentations appear in the round cell ball, these little indentations that begin the process of distinguishing one side of you from the other, the head from the hindquarters. And a distinction that seems to be lost entirely on some people, even 40 years after they're fertilized. But what the book said is that if at that point in the game you were to take a cell from the head and mechanically move it down to the hindquarters, what would happen is that it would migrate right back up. And this is what the book said. It knows what it's supposed to become. I mean, isn't that fascinating? It knows what it's supposed to. So you can imagine how this might strike you if you were researching a book on authenticity. You know, what I took from it is, at a cellular level, we know what we're supposed to become. And in fact, anymore, when I hear people use this kind of language, I don't know, I feel it in my gut. I feel it in my cells. I feel it in my bones. I feel it in the very fiber of my being. Anymore, I think they're talking literally. I think they're talking literally, right? So there was a guy that I included in the Callings book. His name is Howard Ikamoto. He's an artist who lives out in California. And he's described a conversation he had with a 7-year-old daughter who came to him one day and asked him, "Daddy, what do you do at work? What do you do at work?" And he said, "Well, honey, I work at the college, and my job is to teach people how to draw." And he said that she looked back at him incredulous and said, "Daddy, you mean they forget?" I mean, imagine how this would strike a 7-year-old, that you could possibly forget how to draw. I mean, it's like forgetting how to dream or something. But we do forget. I mean, that's the fact. We do forget. And as for how you go about remembering, let me share this. I did one of my Callings weekend workshops at a conference center in Massachusetts years ago called the Rowe Conference Center. And when I got there, I found out at the front desk that there was another workshop also being conducted at the conference center the same weekend as mine. And that one was on the subject of tracking. And I remember standing at the front desk being thrilled that the two workshops at this conference center the same weekend were both about the exact same subject, which was the search for signs. All right? In their case, indicating the presence of animals. In our case, indicating the presence of callings. All right? So I got to talk to the people from that other workshop all weekend because we shared meals in the dining hall. And one of the things that jumped out at me about that bunch was how excited they all were just about the signs of the animals. Not even the animals themselves. I mean, they never saw the damn animals all weekend. It was the middle of winter in western Massachusetts. You know, they never saw the animals, but I've never seen a group of grown-ups and professional people so excited and articulate about the subject of poop in my entire life. This is pretty much all they talked about, you know, and including at the dinner table. And the reason I mentioned that is, well, I've always wanted to say the word poop in church, just until I was little. And now I've said it twice. No, it's because I was inspired by this. This inspired me, and I shared it with the people in my workshop by saying, guys, if we could cultivate that quality of enthusiasm just for the hunt, just for the act of tracking our lives and being in dialogue with them and paying attention to them, I think that our lives are going to reveal things to us that they're not going to reveal if we're not interested. They're just not going to give up their secrets if we don't offer them some truly devoted curiosity. All right? And animal tracks are like signs of any kind, I think. They lead to something. They point to something. You know, in fact, if you get a chance, look at a book called The Tracker by a guy named Tom Brown. This is ostensibly a book about animal tracking, but the bookstores always put it in the spiritual section, which is fascinating to me. And there's a beautiful quote in there. He says, "A track is the end of a string. At the far end, a being is moving, a mystery that leaves itself like a trail of breadcrumbs. And by the time your mind has eaten its way to the maker of the tracks, the mystery is inside you." Isn't that a beautiful description of what spiritual communities call discernment? I just think that's absolutely beautiful. And in fact, when I was interviewing people for the book, one of the things that jumped out at me over and over about all those interviews was how many of the people I spoke to told me that they had some kind of a practice in their life. And the whole point of it was to strike up a conversation with them, with the maker of the tracks. Okay? Some self-reflective practice. Okay? That was just really, so these people were turning the receivers on. Okay? Which is an acquired taste because you have to be willing to hear what you hear when you do that. And they may not necessarily be convenient to the way you're living your life presently, all right? But nothing extravagant either. These practices people told me about, daily journaling, really common. For some people, meditation. For some people, even therapy is a kind of a self-reflective practice. Contemplative reading, so that in addition to reading the daily paper or professional journals or whatever, you're also reading wisdom books. Books about the bigger picture, okay? So what these people are saying to me is, I've got one foot in the outer world and one in the inner, regularly. I've got one, in the material world and one in the sacred. One devoted to the tasks of just competence and one devoted to the tasks of authenticity, all right? Dream interpretation was really common practice, looking at your dreams, all right? Regular short retreats, regular intimate conversation, artwork done in the service of self-discovery as opposed to just exhibition, okay? And your participation in any kind of group whose members get together for the primary purpose of waking up, okay? men's groups and women's groups and mastermind groups and spiritual groups and personal boards of advisors, even 12-step groups, all right? And one of the things that these kind of groups, these kind of practices can help you do is avoid, you know the name Joseph Campbell? You ring a bell? The mythologist who gave us the hero's journey and the bumper sticker, Follow Your Bliss. He said, this is his quote, "The great sacrilege in terms of the soul's integrity is what he called inadvertence. Inadvertence, meaning not paying attention, not being alert, not being awake, not having those receivers turned on. And when you turn them on, you discover, for one thing, there's not just one calling in there. I mean, how many of you guys have ever had a sense, or maybe you have a sense right now, that there's more than one call competing for your attention, right? And in many different departments, there's vocational calls, but there's also relationship calls. And there's lifestyle calls, and moral calls, and service calls, and creative calls, and spiritual calls. You know, and the ones you got when you were 20, let's say, that you got them at that point, aren't they really different than the ones you're getting at 50? Different than the ones you're going to get at 75? So there's like a developmental aspect to these things as well, that calls change as we do. In fact, here's my take. The great vocational question, and vocational in the original sense of the word, it just meant to call, didn't refer to work. The great vocational question is not what should I do with my life, or, you know, what do I want to be when I grow up? And it certainly isn't what major should I declare. It's who am I? I think that's the great vocational question. Who am I? And who we are changes over time. Changes over time. And so will the calls that come through the being that's being called. Okay? So, I have seen this happen a lot in my line of work. People wait and wait and wait for the great big calling. You know, the bony finger of God. They wait, and they're missing all the smaller calls that are right at their feet, and which are really kind of the fire drills for the bigger ones. All right? There's a poet by the name of Wallace Stevens who said, I don't ask for the full ringing of the bell. I don't ask for a clap of thunder. A scrawny cry will do. And I love that. I love that, because that to me is the beating heart of discernment, the scrawny cries approach to discerning your calls, rather than waiting for the big booming voice and the clouds to part or whatever, right? Because calls come in a really impressive variety of forms. And I think it pays to sort of post, like sentries at the various gates to get them when they're coming through. Because calls come as intuitions. I mean, an intuition is really almost clinically a little calling, all right? They come as gifts. What gifts are you endowed with? They come as passions. They come as what makes you furious. There's a calling embedded in that. Anger or righteous anger, those are calls. They come as dreams. I mean, from what I can tell, all the religions of the world seem to agree that dreams are one of the primary channels through which the gods and the goddesses have historically spoken to the mortals. All right? You know the name Tom Robbins, the novelist Tom Robbins? He once said, dreams don't come true, they are true. When we talk about our dreams coming true, we're actually talking about our ambitions. It's very different. You'll love this. Johns Hopkins University did a study that corroborates that idea. And that is that they did a study of pregnant women. And they found that of the women who had an intuition about the gender of their baby, they were correct 71% of the time, which was impressive to me all by itself. But of the women who had a dream about the gender of their baby, they were correct 100% of the time. This is Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore. 100%? I mean, what does that say? We've got access to very deep knowledge in there, and we're sleeping through it most of the time. You know. Whew. So calls come as things like, and this is the level at which I always encourage myself and other people to think about these things, and will in the workshop this afternoon too. This is the level. Calls come as things like song lyrics you can't get out of your head for a week. You know, any of you guys ever familiar with a novelist named Ann Tyler? Does that ring a bell? She wrote, among other books, The Accidental Tourist. You know, The Accidental Tourist, which was made into a movie with William Hurt. So most people know of her work through that. But she's a brilliant observer of the dynamics between partners. All right? She says, I can always tell what my husband is really thinking by the tunes that he absent-mindedly hums in the car. So gentlemen, take note. Because, you know, I'm in the mood for love is really different than tied to the whipping post, something, you know. And, you know, the first time I noticed this in my own life, I was about to make an impulsive decision to quit my job as a reporter and become a freelance writer, just out of frustration at the time. And for a week, right around that period of time, I kept hearing one line, day and night, from The Wizard of Oz. If I only had a brain. Just that one little refrain, and suddenly it dawned on me, oh, I'm not thinking this through. You know, though that's how callings work in these sometimes very subtle ways. They also work in wake-up call, 2x4 approach to consciousness, raising sorts of ways too. But I'm after the small ones before they turn into big ones, all right? So calls come as things like a decision that needs to be made in your life now, not backburnered another year. You know what I'm saying? Some issue that's hanging over your head waiting for resolution. That's a call, right? They come as, where is there friction in your life? Where is there friction? Because it's like in the natural world. Friction occurs where changes are trying to take place. Where does heart argue with head? All right? There's a call embedded in that little drama. Where does passion kind of rub up against security? Right? Where do you fight with people? What are you after? You know what I'm saying? So calls come as things like patterns that have established themselves in your life by now. Patterns like you've like worn a footpath to and from some issue, like the lesson you've endlessly had to learn, or the kind of mistake you continually make, or the kind of partner you continually attract, or getting fired again, or just even the section of the bookstore you always walk into first when you walk into a bookstore. There's a calling embedded in that little pattern, all right? And they definitely come through body symptoms. I mean, I've got an entire chapter in the Callings book called The Language of the Body, because the word symptom means a sign. That's what the word originally means, a sign. Of what? The word pathology, for that matter, means the logic of pain. What's the logic? You know? There was a guy that I interviewed for that chapter, in fact, for both of my books. His name is Arnold Mindell. Anybody ever run across Arnold Mindell? All right. He's a psychologist who started something called process-oriented psychology, and he's a brilliant body-mind guy. And he said to me in the interview, symptoms are usually dreams trying to come true. I'd never heard a remark like that before. And frankly, it mirrors a belief I now have myself, which is that talents and gifts, especially the big ones, become needs that is to be expressed. And if those needs are not met somewhere along the line, they're going to turn into symptoms. All right? physical, emotional. They're going to turn into symptoms of one kind or another. So right after this happened, this interview, I got it. I got what he was saying, because the next week I was in Albuquerque, New Mexico, presenting at a writers' conference, and afterwards I'm out in the lobby chatting with people, that sort of thing. Woman walks up to me out of the crowd, complete stranger to me, walks up to me and says, one of those things that people won't generally say to you unless they're pretty sure they're never going to see you again, I think. She said, "Hey, you know why I'm so fat?" Not a question you're supposed to answer. And before I could even, gather my wits, she answered it. She said, "It's because I have so many stories inside of me I'm not writing down." That was her interpretation, not mine. Okay? And, there is no science or philosophy I'm aware of that could dispute a self-diagnosis delivered with that kind of certainty. I mean, the woman knew her body was trying to tell her something. She knew exactly what it was. She needed to be writing. She understood that, her symptom, in the sense that it was a sign, meant something. And she apparently knew what it meant. Really, it was the mark of Jonah. It was the mark of Jonah. It was the evidence of her flight from a calling. And one, as she put it, this is also her language, one that's pushing out from inside me. Okay? It's fascinating. So I'm going to wind up with this. I used to be a reporter for a number of newspapers. One of them was the Cincinnati Enquirer. And one of my favorite stories that I wrote in all the years that I was there was a story about the circus coming to town. This was Ringling Brothers. And I went down to the train tracks, because they used to travel around on a train, and in a fit of journalistic zeal, and therefore short-sightedness, I let the animal trainer of Ringling Brothers convince me that riding bareback on an elephant at the head of the Barnum and Bailey circus parade through downtown would add color to my story. So, contrary to my, my Jungle Book fantasies of how you get up on an elephant, and this is literally the image I had in mind, that you were going to be airlifted on its trunk. You were going to stand on its trunk and be airlifted. This is what I thought. Actually, the only way I got up under the elephant was to use a plain old aluminum ladder. And the only way to stay up on the elephant during the parade, he said, was to hang onto the elephant's ears. Okay? So those of you who have ridden bareback on elephants, you probably know about this already, but elephant ears have a very unpleasant habit of flapping a lot, especially when they're hot, and it was high summer, and we're talking elephant ear flap. This is not like, kitty cat twitches. And so the only way to stay up there was to remain extremely flappable. Otherwise, I would have been thrown. And it was 15 feet to the ground, and maybe worse, in front of everybody, And you have to picture, I'm the first thing anybody saw in that parade. So for one thing, I'm wearing my business clothes, because he sprung this idea on me at the last second, and I was game. And so I was wearing my business clothes, and my pants are scrunched up above my knees with the black socks. It was just a fashion tragedy, is what it was. And I was the first thing anybody saw in the parade, But when I look back at that experience, it had a lot in common with the experience of following a calling. Okay? In the sense that I was caught by surprise and carried off by something way bigger than me. It was thrilling and nerve-wracking simultaneously. And the elephant couldn't have cared less. I'll tell you what I mean by that. I have discovered that my soul doesn't seem to care what price I have to pay to follow my calls and be in integrity with myself. I hate this. This seems like a design flaw to me, frankly. It seems like it ought to care, but my happiness, my security, my vanity, my popularity don't seem to matter to it. It's not interested in whether I become rich and famous, not interested in whether I live a comfortable life, not even interested in whether people like me or not. But what does seem to matter, in retrospect, I look back at my life, what does seem to matter is hanging on to the elephant and being willing to go where the elephant goes. That does seem to matter. The willingness to go for the big ride. You know, the one that ensures that someday, if your life happens to flash in front of your eyes, at the very least, it will hold your interest. That much at least, right? So I just want to say, finally, that in the spirit of helping to ensure that it does hold your interest, the workshop this afternoon, starting at about noon, is a very hands-on opportunity. This is not lecture style. This is a hands-on opportunity to simply explore what your life may be calling for from you at this juncture, in any arena. And what we're going to really have at is the question, what wants to emerge? What is trying to emerge in your life right now? So it's really just a clarification process, and I hope you'll come. And thank you guys so much. Thank you for inviting me.